And welcome to the podcast where we're talking about game economy, design, and general game design principles. I'm very delighted here to be joined by Nick. Nick, tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do, and a bit about your background.
Yes, so hi, I'm glad to be here. I am Niek Tuerlings. I am a game designer I've been for like 12 years at this point.
Yeah,
Worked at previous companies. Among those are Wooga worked for 5 years there. Worked on mostly on the biggest game they currently have called June's Journey. After this, I worked at Voodoo for about 2 years. Tried to do a big pivot for Voodoo from hyper casual to casual, and for that matter, then I joined a startup here in Berlin where I live, and we were focusing on Web3 games and NFTs, mostly involved in that stuff, trying to pioneer that. And recently, I've been working at Supercell in Helsinki. Well, yeah, that's basically where I am right now.
cool. I mean, so what I find interesting about that is that you've got the gamut of the kinds of games, particularly in the mobile space, which I like. I think you kind of highlighted it when you talked about your time at Voodoo. This principle about how we engage with players over time is something I think is very fascinating. And in particular, I'm really interested to see what role the economy design takes into that. I also have a underlying principle in my mind, which is without engagement, you don't get retention. Without retention, you don't get revenue. That's kind of the way I
Yeah.
kind of look at it. So, in terms of sort of when you look at the differences between the kinds of games you're talking about, even back down as far as June's Journey, what were the quintessential ways as a designer you looked at the game to understand the reasons why people play and the reasons why people stay?
Yeah, so at this point, it depends a little bit what you're looking at, because at Wooga we were making what you would call deep casual games. They are relatively feature rich, so that means that you're looking at retention much more. Where, for example, at Voodoo, where they generally look more at other KPIs, like depending, because they are very much ad driven. There's other KPIs like ROAS that you have to look at, for example, return on ad spend.
Yeah.
So it depends a little bit what you're looking at, but in terms of engagement, it's always kind of retention, but the numbers just look different in different companies. So where a company like Voodoo would be already happy with a few percent day 30. This would not really be the same case for Wooga, where they really try to engage people for a very, very long time, specifically with a game like June's Journey, which is very much focused on an audience that is way more senior and mostly female, because it's sort of a murder mystery. This is really episodic, actually, and so how we looked at engaging players in June's Journey was really to give them something new every month, which would be like a seasonal sort of thing. It would be recurring, so that, like, for example, in February there's always the Valentine's season,
Yeah.
where you always have and then in summer you have summer season and blah blah.
Halloween,
So
those kinds of things.
yeah, all kinds of things, and of course this would be recurring, but then because the meta game for June's Journey has a big it's like basically an island where you place decorations. Those decorations were themed in those seasonal kind of ways to do so, and every year the season would be the same, but the decorations would be different looking, so people would kind of know what they were signing up for. And there were maybe players that I assume, but there would be probably players that might have churned after a while, after playing this game for a year or two, and maybe they got a little bit bored, or a bit it would get a bit stale maybe for them. But then when, I don't know, man, maybe their favorite season, Valentine's season, would come along, I think they might have been feeling maybe some urge of like, okay, let's maybe just check quickly, what's
Check in and
what's
see
happened
what the
now,
vibe
what's
is.
happening. Yeah, what's happening in June's Journey again. So we noticed that a lot of these older ladies, so to speak, they are very loyal because you make a game for them which is a little bit of a niche. The game is specifically tailored to them. Obviously there are a lot of other demographics that also like to play that game, but in general you see that the main audience is from that demographic. And because they don't have that many other very much narrative driven games that are focused on a theme that they really like and that they identify with, which would be like roaring 20s detective style, you would notice that like they would be really sticky, because it's very tricky to find something that is that is the same along those lines.
And I think that's an interesting kind of like conundrum you've got there. And I think there's a deep psychological kind of principle going on between that kind of sense of familiarity and the sense of predictable surprise. This kind of like,
Yes.
I know something's coming, and that anticipation. I mean, how easy is it to sort of when you're doing that? Is it just a pure formula, or what's the sort of creative kind of muscle that you need to flex to make that work?
That's an interesting question. Creative muscle, your brain.
No, but you know what I mean. In terms of the tools, the kind of approaches,
Yeah.
the systems. What are things that make that possible?
Yeah. So you generally are part of a bigger design team,
Yeah.
and because we had a big content pipeline going, that means that like there is a weekly chapter that would come out. And how you would look at it is, let's say you have like four game designers that are responsible for the content creation, not all the creation, but at least implementing it into the game so that all the little building blocks of that week's chapter are in place. You would look at like, okay, I'll take this week, and then the other designer takes the other week, which then means that there are 5 hidden object scenes per chapter. Then there's 1 puzzle scene that has to be done, and then there's numerous other things that you have to do to working together with the artists and check which objects are good and if they're clear, and check if the words below are actually fitting the objects. So there's a lot of different things that you have to do every week, but that would be the content side. So what you would really have to work with is mostly the teamwork. Actually, I think if you are not a team player, you can't really do this, because while everyone still had their own little chapter, you really needed the help and the creativity for brainstorms of the whole design team. So you really work together on getting every chapter out every week. So and then someone gets sick, so you need to really you need to always be on the same
classic
page.
Pipeline conundrums that go, and again, with a game where there's an ongoing systematic requirement to ensure that you're replacing or you're providing something fresh. That's important, but keeping that fresh, keeping that process working. In fact, even getting to the point for a lot of game developers to get, for people who work in the job, quite often you'll join a team that already exists, and that framework will exist. But for a lot of teams that are starting on preparing their new game, getting into the mindset away from building the game to building a pipeline of ongoing content, that seems to be a struggle. Have you seen people dealing with that well or badly?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, not. It's kind of the deal that you sign up for when you get hired with a mobile free-to-play game developer, to be responsible to take care of that game after you launch it, because of course, as most people will know, that in AAA and console and everything and PC games, premium games, you release the game and you're basically 80% done. Yeah, maybe you have to patch a few times. Maybe you want to make a DLC, but then that is basically it. So you're kind of 80% done when you on launch day. You're like kind of quite far. For June's Journey, I think we were at maybe 3% when. Of what now has been put, of all the effort that was put into the game. I think over the last 7 years, because the game is already 7 years old now, there has been an immense amount of work put into this game, not only on the content side, but also on new features and rebalancing of the economy and revamping how users are acquired and everything. It's like it's really insane how much work goes in there. So you see this team of people grow from maybe 10 when I joined, or 15, to I think at this point it would be, I don't know what it is because I'm not there anymore, but I expect it's about 100 or something. It would be really big team, which is quite, for AAA this is like 100 people is not so much, but like for a mobile game that is actually quite a lot. There will be different teams, and the thing is that you would have to, you're kind of expected to to keep working on that game, and that's actually the fun part of it. A lot of companies, they have trouble retaining employees in the teams after a game has been launched, because then the most exciting thing for most people is building a new game. But I have to say that this live ops design and working on a live game is so much more complicated than it is working on a game that you are actually just creating before it gets launched. It is a totally different skill set. So you do see generally that in companies where people there are specific people that are a big part always of conceptualization of new games, because that's basically that's their DNA, and that's what they like to do. And then there is a big part of the company, which is the other part that takes care of the game. And it's not like, okay, now everyone goes away and now the other team comes in. It rolls over basically, so people switch teams accordingly, and some people might come later and earlier. It depends a little bit. But yeah, this setting up a pipeline is not to be sneezed at. It's like really, really difficult actually, and it's one of the reasons why Wooga has been persistently successful with June's Journey, because setting up a content pipeline with 5 HO scenes, the hidden object scenes per week, which is literally, you have to make one every day as a company. That means that, I think it took us 20 weeks or something to maybe half a year into after the launch, where I think we launched with 10 chapters or something. And then players would have to, every week, you have to wait for, if you're early, if you're quicker, you have to wait. So, and then the next chapter comes on a Thursday or whatever, and you would have to make a chapter every week. And I think they have been still doing that up until now, which is insane, because now you have 500-600 chapters. So if you start playing June's Journey now, you can just play forever basically. And the thing is, that content pipeline is really, really difficult, and that's why it's also not so problematic to talk about it like this, because I can tell you that has to be done, but how is the trick,
Yeah, and I think one of the things about what we're learning in terms of live ops is working out what is the right frequency, the cadence of that content to continue to sustain an audience, versus how reusable some of the materials you've created can be, so that you make the job of making it more efficient.
Correct.
Were you reusing content or repurposing content in that process?
Yeah, we did at this point. It's the good thing about the loop like June's Journey is that it's really episodic and narrative driven. So you do want fresh narrative, and therefore there are literally fresh scenes with 75 objects or whatever per scene every week. And it means that you have, after a while, you have such a huge backlog that you can then, if you strip away that narrative and then reuse that scene, which is like, if players play like 4 years, they don't even remember the scene that was 2 weeks ago. They have no idea, because you play one scene for, let's say, a day, or a little bit more or less, and you master that scene, so you know all the objects in that scene. But then you go to the next one, and really your brain just immediately sort of lets go of okay, I don't need that information anymore. So you can totally reuse those scenes. And if you have 700 of these scenes lying around after a few years, you can definitely repurpose them if you strip away that narrative.
Yeah,
because the narrative is, of course, something that is overarching, and that's something you don't really reuse, but that is only the narrative layer on top of it.
Well, for me, it's the framing. The narrative provides a frame that then puts context to that particular. In the hidden objects example, the background image and the placement of the objects, and therefore you've got to identify where those objects are. Those kind of things.
Yeah.
But obviously, in other games, the same principle applies, whether it's a level design or a environment scene. The same principles. Repurposing those could be simply the case of turning the camera around, and the same environment could be expected.
Yeah, although in June's Journey you cannot turn the camera because it's all
can't
2D.
2D, so, I think about in 3D environments you could change the camera. You can change the lighting in a 3D environment. There are lots of different things you can do, and I think realizing the cost and efficiency of reuse of those items. But like you say, you don't want to use the same scene the next day. You've got to make it, you need some sense of movement, some sort of progression, some sort of sense of change. Now, in terms of narrative framing, I can't remember exactly with June's Journey, but I think each kind of case is its own thing. But isn't there an underlying kind of narrative arc as well?
Yeah, there's a few layers. One chapter is part of, I have to say it correctly, but I think it's part of how did we call it back then? It's part of a few chapters, which is an arc.
Yeah.
And in that arc takes place in a volume of chapters, and a volume is basically a book. So you could see it like a book. So if you write, I think at this point Jun's written 8 books or 9 books, because there's 8 or 9 volumes, and within those volumes there are these arcs, which are 6-7 chapters or long, and then every volume has about, I don't know, maybe 50 or maybe 100, so depending on the volume. Some books are thicker than others. Of these scenes. So there is a really big there is a big planning going on there, and this goes weeks and weeks ahead. I think we worked maybe 20, 15 weeks. The writers started first, and they would work maybe 20 weeks ahead or something in terms of narrative, which is insane because it's basically half a year that you're working ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I'm used to working sort of 3 months ahead as my kind of base principle. But like you say, each of these things, you got to take into account the whole pipeline. The
whole pipeline, and which is hugely complex.
I mean, it's one of the things that I find deeply fascinating, and particularly because every game team's approach can be different. Obviously, June's Journey is an incredibly intense experience. But you've got to think about the writing, you've got to think about the art, you've got to think about the gameplay, you've got to think about the packaging of the store elements, what's going to be commercialized. But in a hidden object game, what's the balancing aspect of that? What I mean by that is how do you sustain, and I'm going a little bit faster than I meant to. I meant to carry on this idea of the pipeline. But we talked about the pipeline, but you've got me thinking about this whole process. Once we've established the pipeline, when we're building the game and the feel of the game, how are you balancing things? I mean, in terms of what is the bar of what difficulty is in, for example, a hidden object game? Because it's not the same as like, I can't put stats to a monster and therefore I know that monster's more difficult. The placement of a butterfly in the background or whatever it might be, I can't put a number, I can't put a power up to finding that easily.
You can actually. The thing is that you have so many objects per scene, and some of them are harder than others. Per scene, you just have to check which ones are the easiest, which ones are the hardest, but you have to sort of vary it up a little bit. And, depending on how many stars you unlock in that scene, it's literally like a progression. So there's like 5 or 6 different stages, 5, where in the beginning there's only 15 of them, and then there 15 more and 15 more and 15 more, and the last part is obviously the stage where the hardest objects come in, and where you can also have the biggest pool of objects, because now all the objects can be picked from, so you still have to remember 75 of them, but it never goes up. It's the same throughout the whole game, and per chapter I think there is a chapter or 2 that, so depending on where the chapter is, I think there is a little bit of a difference in scoring, but there is no huge up and down, and it goes the same for it's a little bit similar to match 3 games or puzzle games, where you have one level that is a little bit more difficult than the other. But overall, you cannot keep going up, because Candy Crush has 17 million levels at this point, or whatever. I don't know how many. But so you can't keep going up, because at some point it becomes unplayable. And what I liked personally to work in a hidden object game like June's Journey is that you don't have to do all this rebalancing all the time. Where in puzzle games you have to do a lot of due diligence to optimize, and like say weeks after or months after, you might realize, this batch of levels is way harder, and there's a lot of churn actually in that amount of levels, so we have to rebalance them all. Usually it's adding a few moves, which is totally fine, but in that case it is a lot of it's a lot of work, and it's a lot of labor. It's very intense, and for you don't have to look back, because it's basically done and it's set, and the objects are placed, and the objects are set in which level is the hardest one and which one is the easiest one.
You kind of got an existing formula to work from, but like you say, sometimes it comes down to the color variance might be on a particular object against this background type of thing.
That's a bit too detailed. We don't really look at it like that, I think. It's more like you can, as a designer, you can sort of, as a level designer, which is level design in an hidden object game is relatively low effort, because again, like, you only have to do a little bit and once. It's not a big deal if one of the bigger objects comes in also last, as long as it should be like spread out over the scene nicely. So it's important that in every corner there is one of every difficulty everywhere, so that not the whole scene clogs up on the right side where the left side is still empty. So you still have to just make that work, but it's not a huge challenge to do that, actually.
No,
It
no, I
doesn't
get
take
it.
so much time.
So moving on from it. So obviously, Dune Journey gives us a really kind of interesting baseline of a way of looking at the
Yeah.
pipeline of process of maintaining, and then looking back at the data and optimizing based on people's actual progression versus our expected progression.
Mm-hmm.
But when you start in, for example, in the Voodoo kind of context, where you've got a team that are coming from a hyper casual space, where it's all about the most compelling instant gratification to being something more sustained, what's the sort of challenge you're trying to? How do you approach a challenge like that?
Yeah, that was very different because at that point we were tasked to convert to find an audience that is sort of in between deep casual and hyper casual, which was needed because of the IDFA deprecation and
Yeah,
everything. So at that point there was a bit of an urgency to be like, okay, what can we do to increase retention at least a little bit so that people watch a bit more ads before they churn, and we have to give them like a new core mechanic.
yeah,
And the trick really was to add a metagame to a specific core game, because Voodoo was very good at creating and finding really enticing core games.
yeah,
But in terms of metagame design, they didn't really have that much experience at that point when we joined, at least, which was 2020. And slowly we have seen at Voodoo that now they have hybrid casual, which is like sort of an added metagame that makes sure that players can actually be retained at least a little bit longer. It's still not the same as in Junior, where people have like played for 4 years. That doesn't
yeah.
happen. But in games like Mob Control, which is I think at this point still Voodoo's most successful hybrid title, that has also, I don't know, 20-30% IAP revenue. I think you can there see that, yeah, they take some of the usual suspects of features in terms of metagame into that sort of framework where there is a little battle pass, and there is a monthly cadence of like, okay, now it's this season, now it's that season, but you still miss that sort of long term goal that is not really, yeah, maybe if you like numbers going up, then you can see that, but you can keep playing forever, but that's technically not really enough
Not
usually.
really enough progression or sense of purpose.
Yeah, and you will start seeing that there it's still a little bit like, it's like a hyper casual game, but
Yeah,
it has like really fancy clothes,
yeah.
basically, but it's still a hyper casual game in the
Well,
end, and
for
yeah.
me, the thing that introduced the idea of a hyper casual to me was Arch Hero. I found Arch Hero was
Yeah.
really
But that was
smart.
really nice and hybrid, though. Yeah, Archero is a beautiful example,
Mm.
because Habi is one of the only truly hybrid game developers that
Yeah.
I really appreciate how they look at games, because
Mm.
yes, their core mechanic is something you can immediately pick up and play,
Yeah.
but their meta is quite substantial. Like, I guess at some point now, Mob Control is also touching this. If you compare Voodoo with that, the thing is just that there is no the power progression in Mob Control is basically fake.
Yeah.
It's like it's not really there. You don't grow in level that much. It looks like you do, but technically you don't. You should try losing in that game. It's hard to do. Like, it just,
Yeah.
and Archero, you'll, if you just stand
Oh,
still,
yeah.
you will lose in a second. So that's like
He's
it.
very quick.
Yeah, it goes very quick. So there is a really big difference in power progression in
Yeah.
those two games, and that is the big difference
What I
there.
really liked about Arch Hero, particularly, and why I go back to it, and you said a little bit about Survivor IO, but I'm not as much of a fan of Survivor IO
Hmm.
personally. I think commercially it's been more
Oh yeah,
effective
it's
for
huge.
them by a long way. But I mean, I think one of the issues that they had one of the things about Archer is I felt like I had character. I felt like I was
Hmm.
going on a journey. I was unlocking chapters. I don't
Yeah.
think we had that much in the way of seasonality, but the 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 new heroes. The thing they were
Oh.
selling was heroes. The
Hmm.
trouble is, because I could remove anything I'd earned and rebuild it, there was no actual technical difference between any of the heroes.
Yeah.
So it was really just pure cosmetic on a game that had no
Hmm.
way of showing off other than
Yeah.
myself.
Yeah.
And
That's true.
I think that's the
Yeah.
underlying. I've said it to the team, the Happy team in Beijing about COVID. I managed to Facebook guys had me out talking about the kind of market at the time, and it was interesting, kind of being being a fanboy and telling them something they didn't
Yeah.
necessarily want to hear from someone like me. Anyway, the point being, though, I think it's something about this idea of understanding the sense of purpose and progression, which is essential to getting that transition between
Yeah.
great gameplay. But I think you've hit on something which is without going the whole hog, without going to the whole step into what I mean. I use the term context rather than meta because I had a social layer on top of that. But I think
Yeah.
it's really interesting kind of thinking about the way that kind of purpose progression optimization part of the game fits
Yeah.
into how we want to keep playing it. And I wonder if what I'm really referring to with Arch Hero is actually the lack of opportunity to really optimize in a
Yeah.
meaningful way that's differentiated from the core game, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense, but if I've been trying to think about it, like at some point, like what could they add?
Yeah.
And you can see the answer to that after what is it, 5 years ago
Yeah.
that this came out? 6 years ago. Now you have Artero 2. I
Yeah.
don't know if you've played
I
it.
have not yet.
Yeah, it's good because what I like there is that they mixed. They don't only have rooms anymore.
Mhm.
Like you just go to the next room and the next room, and then there's 50 rooms per level and or
Yeah.
whatever. Sometimes in Archero 1 it already changes a little bit so that like rooms have a lot of spawn waves, but in Archero 2, the differences in level design is very different, where some levels in between, they are actually Survivor IO-esque, where you really just walk around in a specific space, and then there's a lot of enemies coming to you. It's not like a billion enemies, but it is the same idea that you don't go to a new room every time. You just basically fight them off in waves. And
Yeah.
while that is a subtle difference, you do see that they have optimized in terms of level design, where they added as much variation as they think would be safe. And I have to say that I agree with their careful iteration on that. Like, don't change a winning formula, but maybe add to it. So if you have Survivor AO and you have Archero, maybe they are not incompatible together, these
No,
mechanics.
no.
So you can actually add them to one game, and that's what they did with Archero too,
Yeah. No,
which is super
I
cool. I would recommend playing it if you can. I think it's still in soft launch, but there's a few countries you can check if you have Android specifically.
yes.
And yeah, so yeah, it's cool. So yeah, to your question, I think what you asked was more like how did they differentiate?
So I'm looking at the bottom line I'm trying to work out is different techniques to extend
Yeah,
that sense of purpose
yeah,
progression optimization that makes me
yeah.
feel the game is satisfying beyond the first few plays.
Yeah, the thing is generally the bottom line rule in free to play game design is you come for the core and you stay for the meta.
Yeah.
That is generally the switch that these games make. That's why there is no meta in the FTUE. There's generally first session is just core, but if you don't show people the meta in within a few sessions and don't hook them with this longer term progression, the core game will get stale in a way.
Yeah.
So you have to find a really nice tie-in in the meta game that sort of changes enough in the core game that it is still sufficient to engage people, but it keeps it sort of on the same level in terms of core game, that you don't really change the game too much. So that meta game actually is the most important part. So if you would ask me, like, and it's not a difficult question, but like, how do you retain players better than Archero 1 did? I think they could have done more on the social side and on the tournament side, ladder side, all those things. Like this is the most important. In the end, it's always about the last step of the player journey, where like the longest term engagement you can get is it's always fueled by social interactions. Otherwise because social interactions are cheap because you don't have to design them, you have to just facilitate it and then it happens. It's not it's very it's I say it like it's very easy, but it's actually very difficult because you have to make people interact in a meaningful way, which is like one of the hardest things to do in a
And
free to play
as
single
soon as
player
they
game.
exactly, and as soon as they do, the risk of poor behavior, toxicity, all the other moderation issues arises, all of which are manageable. It's just that we have to as long as we pay attention to them.
Yeah, you would be surprised if you. It's a tricky thing. So mostly the toxicity thing is generally only a problem if it's PvP. So if
That's not quite my experience. We've had some very interesting. I happen to have worked in a whole bunch of PC mobile console experiences.
yeah,
Um, I mean, okay, this is not really toxicity in itself, but I mean, I always find it funny that when we had in PlayStation Home, we had a Little Big Planet space,
Mhm.
and the guys decided that they wanted to have a UGC area, and so we know what was drawn immediately,
Yeah.
and it was
Of
Alex.
course.
It was the CTO basically. I think it was. Anyways, someone very senior in Media Molecule decided to be the first person to do that, and it took a few seconds for that to happen.
Of course. The time to
Yeah,
that is very
time to
short.
TTP as we call it.
Yeah, TTP, exactly.
But the kind of the movement from that to sort of more destructive behavior is relatively small but
Yeah.
manageable. Again, framing and context and
Yeah, yeah.
moderation
It depends. Yeah,
deals
but
with that.
it's mostly what you facilitate and what
Mm.
you breathe. And I'm not saying that it's not you don't need to moderate anything if it's not PvP, but I think it's substantially. I think it's only well a few percent compared to what you would normally get in
Yeah.
terms of toxicity and problems when you add that sort of competitive layer. Even in games like June's Journey, there are competitive elements that where you play with one team against another, but you cannot talk to those teams. You can only talk within your team. So it doesn't really create that. We don't have a world chat there.
No.
So
Well,
just it depends what you choose to put in there. If you let's put a world chat in there and let's let people put blocks, yeah, of course, then the TTP is very high and then you get a lot of smack talk. But yeah,
briefing happens, yeah.
yeah, just maybe don't do that then.
Well, I mean, I was also thinking that social layers can take many forms. They can be
Yeah,
in gameplay, they can be in clans. And, the Supercell ability to do trading within a clan is a really smart method, I think. Even in Heyday, this is what I find fascinating. In Heyday, there was a trading mechanism, and a language was created by the players in order to facilitate them to be able to do larger scale trades, which I still think is amazing.
yeah, that's cool.
Nothing the development team had anything to do with.
Yeah,
And
you have to find a way somehow.
you have to, but people do find a way, and I think that's what's so magical. But I do think that people only find a way when they care enough about the experience. Unless we get, like you say, they come for the mechanic, and they stay for the meta, the context, wherever. But I do find that we often see people reverting. When the easy thing to do in trying to work out what kind of long-term retention model to use is to just revert to, we'll just chuck in some RPG style leveling system. And I always wonder if that's really, because I think it's easy to do that, but not to understand why that worked in the first place, why that was a good idea. And for me, it's like, how do we show people, how do we foreshadow why you want to keep playing? To me, that's the heart and soul of what makes any progression system operate. Is like, I can see that's the goal, that's achievable, and I know when I get to that goal, you'll show me another. That's how I look at it. How do you look at kind of like what makes those kind of retention systems operate?
Yeah, I mean the retention for games like just in general is so varied and so different. It's like it's very difficult to just say a catch-all answer.
Yeah.
Like if you think about Clash Royale, for example, you have the cards that you can like upgrade, and you might have a few favorite cards that you generally use in your deck. So that's the one you want to upgrade. But there's not necessarily a goal for you to go. You just want more and more because it's directly linked to the power that you have. But what turns me off in games like that, because I am thinking way too much about this stuff as a designer, is that every time I level up my card, yes, I'm getting stronger, but my opponents also get stronger. To me, that is not super interesting. But I am a very different player type from maybe not so competitive. Or what I do like is in games like that you do sort of transition into a new layer of the meta that's where I mean meta is really meta, like the actual meta of the characters which are strong and which strategies are being used, and that is actually super interesting, but that is a very different way of retaining players. And at some point, it's out of your hands what part of the meta players are in when they are at player level 6 or something, because that might be where a lot of the players realize that the giant is very good, even though giants are actually a bit terrible if you look at what pros do. So it depends a little bit like what the scale is there.
Well, and in that particular example, what is good can change in the context of what other people have.
Yeah, that's called the meta. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and so for me, this is where the whole sort of underlying principle of the scissor paper stone, whatever you want to call it, the kind of this thing beats that thing, which is beaten by that thing, that model.
Yeah.
To me, the dilemma aspect of that, the
Mhm.
increasing one thing, that's got to come at a cost, even if it's only an opportunity cost,
Mm.
because I think it's only when there is an opportunity cost associated with progression that we really feel it, that we really pay attention to it.
Yeah.
If we're just adding one, I don't think we care that much. I mean, we care that we're one more than somebody else, sure.
Yeah.
I don't think we care as much if we've had some impact on what direction that's taken us down.
And by we, you mean as players?
As players, yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Well, the thing that players don't usually, realize is that every time I unlock a new card, it means that I have less chance to get my favorite card that was another card, because
Yeah.
now I can also get that new card that I might not care about.
Yeah.
So the progression it gets like sort of slower and slower because everything gets more diverted. So
And
diverse.
that's
Yeah.
a beautiful kind of use of mathematic probability
Mm.
to create a valuable feature of gameplay that feels like it's giving to you, and it's kind of ironically taking
It's taking it
away.
away. And that's the beauty of it. So if you can do this, then you're quite good in it. You're quite in a good position because it feels really nice to get a new character. But as a designer, I think I don't want new characters because now I have to spread out all my probability over more characters that I can get from this gacha or from whatever.
This is another thing about. I think it was Clash Royale that first did this as well, which is they introduced the idea that your treasure chest would take time to unlock.
Yeah.
Up to that point, you would essentially unlock it immediately and then get, watch an ad to double your reward, and that was it. Whereas
Mhm.
now you did something to unlock quicker, which
Mhm.
made it feel more satisfying in an interesting way. That you owned that already, but it
Yeah.
had an interesting energy mechanic element too, because you could only have a certain number of slots.
Yeah, you just have 4 slots. Yeah, exactly.
So I
Yeah,
had to.
it's a very beautiful way of doing it because you don't need energy, you don't need hearts. You could just have a few slots, and you realize as a player very quickly it's like, yeah, I can play now, but I don't get chests. So this is classic Supercell. They always do that, and that's what I really love about what they do and in their games. Like in Brawl Stars, you also have these tokens, and when you play, you convert tokens to battle pass points or something like that. And when the tokens are out. You get more tokens later, but it doesn't keep you from playing, and that is actually super nice to have. And
Play
I
to
don't
enjoy.
like this lives mechanic where like you just get cut off from the whole game if your lives are over. It's like super brutal, and it's not great.
Whereas, if I know that I'm not playing optimally, but I want to keep playing because I'm in the
Mhm.
mood and I still can, that feels enabling. Yeah, but it also provides an anchor against overly fast progression.
Yeah, but I think you can do it in a more subtle way. I'm personally more in this team of like let people play when they want, but take away their like sort of progression. But if they like to play the core game, let them play the core game. And obviously, you cannot even buy more tokens in Supercell games. You generally don't have a way to speed that up.
Well, there's a psychological reason why that's beneficial, because one of the things that can help reduce the risk of a more compulsive behavior
Yeah.
is by having natural breakout moments.
Yeah.
So it actually, I think, from if you kind of follow that kind of aspect of the evidence base we've currently got on games, somebody who has an issue with being able to break out is less likely to burn out. And
Yes.
actually,
It's the classic dilemma, and it depends how you look at it.
Yeah.
If you feel like you are the designer that wants to keep people from playing and to protect themselves against themselves, sure.
well, that's
I don't think.
more than I'm thinking.
Yeah, I mean, there's something to say about that. On the other hand, there is no way for us to find out if that actually is better than not. Because I have to say, I think Clash of Clans, which is they don't have an energy mechanic at all.
Well, they do in the
they
sense
have
of how long it takes to earn enough coins to upgrade town. And
Yeah, that's true.
You've got the ratchet kind of mechanism of like, I've got to upgrade all the buildings in order to upgrade the main.
Yeah, yeah. At some point, you just run out of things to do because of all the timers.
Yes.
Yeah, that's true. And for that matter, it's maybe because that is the golden example for retention. There is no game, as I wrote in the post on LinkedIn, that there has a higher retention than
Yeah.
Clash of Clans, which is absolutely crazy. That retention for that day, what is it? The day 60 retention is what is it? I
So,
forgot. I'm not good with numbers. Remembering 20-ish, 30 is
it
it's
was
insane.
utterly insane. Yeah.
Yeah, which is beautiful because that's exactly why, though. Like, you can just be in the game and stare at what happens, but there is not really much to do because there are these timers, right? But
Yeah.
it doesn't feel like it does feel in puzzle games where you just get told like, hey, screw off, you don't have any lives anymore, or you just have to
Yeah.
pay me. It's basically just such a transparent blackmail mechanism that I have to say I don't like that. So if you really feel like you have to protect people against like burning out sooner, find a way to really camouflage it. And there's different ways to do
Yeah,
it.
and I think
But
to me, even just down to having a natural cycle where you have a minute and a half or whatever the time frame is for the game,
yeah,
where there's a natural point where if somebody wanted to take a break, they can have that intensity relax, and they could come back knowing there's something else to come back to. I think that gives us that balance. But I mean,
of course.
I just pulled up the chart. So for those that don't know, Nick posted on LinkedIn chart full of top 10 top end games and their retention. Clash of Clans had a 59% day one retention,
Yeah.
and day 30 was 29%. I know games that make a profit on day one 29%,
Yeah. Which is
and this
that's
is well, that's low.
yeah, it depends. Yeah,
That's
of
a low
course, it's
one.
quite low, but yeah, it's
But 23% day 60. I mean, this
yeah,
is incredible. When normally we're talking about, what good looks like, quote unquote, as
yeah.
40% day one and 10% day 30, when the typical median, even 10 years ago was like 35% day one,
Mhm.
15% day seven, and probably 6 to 8% day 30.
Mhm.
There are plenty of games out there that wash their face, for want of a better phrase, at that level. But again, it's not just about the retention. Retention is what the underlying driver of your engine, of course.
Yeah, it's an indicator of how your engagement is.
Exactly. And I think it's essential to get, if you haven't got your eye on the ball on your retention, you haven't got a game that's going to be successful, basically.
Yeah, it's a good North Star metric.
And so we talked about, the point about the way that, teams like, Supercell have been very smart in the way that they not disguise, but they kind of use natural mechanics that have
Mhm.
properties that give you these scalable, balanceable mechanisms.
Yeah.
Like you add a new card type, now the random, spread will
Mhm.
naturally change and will feel right, even though I'm getting a less payoff. What other sort of techniques have you seen that you think are important ways? I mean, have you seen other different ways of approaching this problem of
Yeah.
retention and balancing?
Yeah, if you want to put the handbrake on, you mean, right, for
Yeah,
players?
things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, there's many ways, but it generally always comes down to some timer. In free to play, there is not too much else that you can do.
Well, actually, I wasn't thinking just about the timer bit. Sorry, I was thinking more about the kind of opposite of that. So the reasons to come back, the reasons to
Ah,
return.
okay. Yes, that's a better question. Yeah, that's much more interesting. Yeah, the reason why you want to come back is obviously your chest is just opened
Yeah.
in Clash Royale, and that's mainly the reason why you come back. What I like even more is basically the fear of missing out. I
Yeah.
think that is like super strong because it's not about like, oh, maybe there's an event that I would like or something. No, there's literally someone who can raid your base if you don't come back. And the same they do this very smartly in Coin Master and Monopoly Go, where you just people if you don't come, you have like shields, especially like in Coin Master is the one that I just have on the top of my mind. You have 3 shields, and if you come back, you just roll a few more shields, and then people really cannot get to your reserves of money.
Yeah.
But after these shields are gone, players can actually start coming to after your gold, which actually doesn't really matter because even if you have 0, you come back a week later in Coin Master and you get a billion spins and you have a lot of money again. But the fact that people take stuff from you is actually that's just this loss aversion part that people don't like. So I like these kinds of reasons a lot, because it really gets to that sort of primal, like, no, this is mine kind of like feeling. But that's, you can do these simple tricks in many different meta games, even in puzzle games where you don't have a battery of coins, or maybe maybe you do. But like, I don't know. I would like to see maybe a puzzle game creator who tries to dabble in this sort of loss aversion mechanic of like, okay, someone just came to your garden in Gardenscapes and they stole a statue. Now you have to go get it back. Why is this not like it? I mean, I get it. It is a positive experience, so you don't want to bother people with this, and it's like, it's not. It gets a bit toxic, but like,
well, that's the thing.
There are ways to make this fun.
I mean, loss aversion has been used as a sort of quote unquote dark pattern, but in itself isn't. In itself, it is a natural human reaction, and like you say,
I mean, without loss aversion, every board game would be boring.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, it's understanding how we can apply the technique to make sure that the player feels more engaged. More, like you said, if somebody's come and stolen a statue, well, let me go get it back. And now I've got a new mission, and that's now something extra to do. And I've got a little story in my own garden. My garden. That's my precious statue that I managed to regain.
And to make this positive, let's riff on this little idea where people can steal statues in Gardenscapes. I don't know if they're paying attention, but let's say that, every time there is a interaction between two players, one player steals something from the other, and now you can go to that other person's garden and steal. First, you can also steal back your statue, but on top of that, the game generates a little bit of extra value that now maybe that statue has become a little bit nicer color. It becomes silver. It becomes gold. I mean, this is a stupid example, but like, I'm just saying that as a creator of a game, as a developer, you can add value when interactions happen. So that's way you can make it positive, even though initially that something being stolen from you is a negative thing. But when you know that it is in a safe environment that actually benefits you, it's a really, really nice.
Start looking forward to the thieves coming around.
Exactly, and in June's Journey, we had a very beautiful way to do that with gifting bushes, which is basically, instead of, pressing that one button that, normally in the most basic implementations, you just have, okay, I joined this group of people, and every day I could just ask for lives, and then you get a few lives. That's like the most boring and the most uninspirational implementation of that version of that mechanic. Is basically just gifting each other extra stuff. But what we did in June's Journey was beautiful, because you could actually place a bush on another person's island. Normally you can move all your objects around on this island, but you cannot move the bushes because people put those bushes there. Other people put them there. The only thing you could do is remove them. And what you got, so people would pay a bit of hard currency, and when you removed them, you get some soft currency. But now you are in debt to that person, because they that they paid this hard currency to actually put that bush on your island. And what has been now, that becomes then a sort of an implied reciprocal relationship where you sort of are now expected to give back. It's like paying rounds in the bar, basically.
Yeah.
You just go back and forth until you forget about each other because you're too drunk. But in June's Journey, you don't get drunk, so it's actually perfect because you can just keep going. And that is such a much nicer way of doing it than just pressing a button and sharing it to even no one. You don't even know who you share it with, these lives generally. And when I see a feature like that in a game, in puzzle games, I'm just like, again, like, this is. Can you come up with something a little bit more inspirational?
The chef's kiss is, for me, is that thing about when you get that someone understanding the underlying value of the particular mechanism, twisting it so it becomes joyful, rather than a kind of burden.
Exactly.
That's when it becomes beautiful. That's when it becomes a delight. I think for me about the conversation we've been having is, I think what we're underlying saying is understanding the gameplay for those players and why they're doing it. Find ways to be able to keep that fresh and give them some more of it. Obviously, balancing the level of work required to get there.
Yeah.
But if you don't understand why the mechanics work, understanding how to twist them to represent the mechanics so that it becomes delightful.
Yeah. How to do that.
That's the art.
Yeah, that's the art. Exactly. Yeah, that's the tricky part.
That's pretty rough. Oh, thank you very much for that. Is there sort of any one thing you think you'd like to have any designer thinking about retention in particular, that they
Yeah.
should take away from this conversation?
I have to say, like, I think the thing we just mentioned, I think that is the most important part. So if you feel like, okay, you take the base of a feature that you know what the intention is. You want people to gift each other energy, and
Yeah.
if they are both online, you have an extra benefit because you just gave something. Now evolve that and put it in the game, however, whatever games you have, because again, in every game you can implement this in a different way, but the concept is still the same. I would say just like be innovative and creative in a way of like, how do I transform this sort of mechanic and apply it to the declarative layer of my own game. It's harder it's like, it's not easy to do, but I think that's what is the most I mean, that's the reason why we want to be game developers and game designers, because that you're basically inventing stuff that fits to what fits in your ecosystem that you created. So I think that's quite good,
Right.
and that should be the goal. But it's, of course, it's like, hey, please invent something nice. It's not easy, but
Yeah, just make good games.
yeah, why don't we all just make good games?
Yeah,
You know?
exactly. So, Nick, thank you so much for that. If people want to get hold of you or find you, what's the easiest way for them to do that?
You can always add me on LinkedIn, follow me, and drop me a message there. It's probably the easiest way. You can also email me, niek@ludocious.com. My blog is just right there, Ludocious. You can find my blogs, the blog posts that I've written for a long, all the
And
deconstructions that I.
we'll try and include that in the notes as well. Nick, thank you so much. Much appreciated. And if you've enjoyed this or you find it interesting thinking about game economy design, then please do the usual like, subscribe, and share, and all the usual stuff like that. And on that note, until next time, this has been your conversation about game economy. Great. Thank you very much.